My name's Susan Brown, and I'm going to introduce the Linked Infrastructure for Networked Cultural Scholarship Project, or LINCS. LINCS is a cyber infrastructure project. That means that it's funded by the Canada Foundation for Innovation, our national infrastructure funder, to serve researchers broadly across the country. And we represent immediately more than 50 researchers and a wide range of data sets and disciplines, as well as 8 universities and 8 other partners in the cultural memory sector. So LINCS's mission is to convert, enhance, mobilize, link, and make accessible data sets, and to make those useful to researchers across the world as research data. And its strategy for doing this is to use a set of technologies that create linked open data. Linked open data makes strings out of text. It creates things from them by giving them unique IDs so that they represent real or conceptual entities in the world. And it makes those links that we use on the web all the time meaningful by embedding semantic information into them that can relate different entities to each other. So when you put IDs together with ontologies that tell a machine what the relationships are, then you get a web that is machine processable, and it's much more like a database than the web that we have now. But it is not a database. It is what's called a knowledge graph, because those entities and relationships create graphs. So the entities in this diagram are represented by the dots, and the edges or relationships are represented by the lines. And the knowledge graph that we know best is fed into the results that we get sometimes when we search Google, where we get the Google results in the main part of the screen, and then off on the right hand side we get an organized set of information about the entity. And Google has its own knowledge graph, which is proprietary and which we do not see, but it also draws upon the linked open data knowledge graph. And in this case, we can see a few bits of information that have quite possibly derived from Wikipedia. It tells us, in fact, that it gets that description information from Wikipedia. It also may be getting the information that Wolf is the author of Mrs. Dalloway from DBpedia, which is the linked data representation of Wikipedia. And it is typing that book perhaps as a book through the RDF type attribute, RDF type being part of the RDF schema, a standard developed by the World Wide Web Consortium. And it may be using the class of book coming out of its own vocabulary, that is Google's own vocabulary, through schema.org. And I just want to mention too that Wikidata, which is also a spin-off of Wikipedia, is another very important linked open data site on the web. So the Google Knowledge Graph draws on open data and closed data to present this very different, much more organized set of information about Wolf than it generates through its main search results algorithm. Now, when you look at the linked open data cloud, it's huge. It's got lots of data sets. They're all connected to each other. This is a visualization of it that you can explore interactively online. You can't read this because the graph is so big, but at the very center is DBpedia because so many sites link to it across the web. Linked data potentially has a lot of benefits. Some of these are more potential than real. But certainly right now we're seeing a lot of improved discoverability and sharing of data as a result of the fact that linked open data is based on a web standard developed by the W3C consortium. So all the data is structured in a common way, which makes it comprehensible to multiple systems. And that means the data can be shared more easily across sites and becomes interoperable because it's structured in the same way. It's using the same entity identifiers. It's using the same vocabularies for properties and relationships. And that means that it's ripe for reuse in other contexts. And when you draw together information from across the linked open data graph, you can also contextualize entities a lot better by bringing together the information that exists about them on other sites. A couple of more sophisticated benefits that we hope will come from linked open data are inferencing, because ideally you should be able to take all of that structured information and those properties that relate it and by pulling it together from multiple sites, know more about what those entities have in common and the kinds of relationships that there are between them than might be stated on any single site. And likewise, because it brings together and connects data from across many different sites, it is a good basis for developing systems that support serendipity of the kind that we associate with physical libraries and being able to move through a structured knowledge environment physically. We hope that linked open data can support that virtually. So LINCS is mobilizing a lot of data. It's starting with researcher data, and we have quite a lot of it in a number of different fields. It's also very importantly bringing in a lot of the cultural heritage data that's been digitized in Canada through organizations such as Library and Archives Canada and the Canadian Research Knowledge Network with its Heritage Canadiana collections. We're also keen to experiment with really large digitized data sets like those in the Hathi Trust or the Internet Archive, because they have some very important Canadian content, and we'll be hoping to take not only their metadata, but a subset of the data itself and extract linked open data from those large data sets. And then, of course, we want to link it to the rest of the web, which is very important in terms of being able to contribute researcher knowledge back to the web and benefit from the linked open data that's already out there. So what will we do with all that data to make it into an infrastructure for cultural research? Well, we have to take all those different types of data, not just in terms of domains, but in terms of their structure, ranging from very structured to not structured at all, with documents coming out of things like the Text Encoding Initiative in between, or library metadata, and we have to convert them. And that process means, first of all, deciding what ontologies and vocabularies to use. We have to convert the data into the format of linked open data, which is the Resource Description Framework, or RDF. We have to reconcile and link those entities up across the data sets with common entities and common vocabularies where they exist. And most important of all, we have to provide means for researchers to look at the results of those processes, those automated processes and scripting and so on that we'll use to do the first conversion, and refine and correct that data so that it becomes useful for their research. So we'll have to have a big storage facility for doing this. These are often called triple stores because they store the subject, predicate, or property or relationship object structures that are called triples in linked open data. And it will have to deal with the fact that this is research data and it will be changing. It's not just being converted once. It will have to be versioned and made accessible to researchers for ongoing work. And then lastly, but most importantly in some ways from a researcher perspective, is the interface. We can't make this our focus. The funding is for conversion, but it is nevertheless essential that we provide useful access to this data in order to prove its value and make it useful for scholars as researchers. So querying and browsing the data in order to be able to see what's there. We hope to have some widgets that will allow people to use our data in other contexts, not just through our interfaces. And it will also be very important to have conversion interfaces so that people can continue to work with the data, both to create new data and to continue refining what is there. So that, in a nutshell, is what LINCS is going to do, and we think it will keep us pretty busy for the next 2.5 years. But when we're done, we hope that we'll be making a contribution to the larger ecology for linked open data, which includes not just researchers, not just scholars producing scholarship, but the GLAM community and the scholarly publishing community. We all share data. We all have data that can link to each other very usefully. And the purpose of this infrastructure is really to try to leverage those connections that are there implicitly in our data, but to bring them out and make them useful and usable. So, as of fall 2020, we are well underway. Despite the pandemic, we were able to hire a fantastic team of people who are working very effectively and have made really great progress towards building the LINCS infrastructure. So that's links in a nutshell. You can stay on top of what we're doing by going to our website or signing up for our newsletter. We have a Twitter feed, and we welcome discussions with other groups, libraries, researchers, research projects that are keen to work with linked open data, because by working with those folks, we will ensure that links really is useful as an infrastructure for cultural scholarship. Thank you.